All right. How's it going, everybody? I'm just getting everything fired up. I'm streaming from a few different platforms today, so I'm just making sure everything is going. I'm over on Instagram, so if you're on Instagram, you can watch me over there. The only disadvantage is you don't get to see what I share on the screen because I don't have it connected to StreamYard. We haven't figured that out yet. Uh, Got to figure that out. So, welcome. If you're new here, my name is Brandon. This is Momentum Canada, where, um, as of recently, I talk about God. I talk about the Bible. I talk about anything to do surrounding Christianity, because I really firmly believe that this nation needs God, and I'm trying to help people get there. So if that's not if that's not for you, I can't force that on you, and I completely understand if you'd have to unsubscribe and just stop following this channel. But I see this as a need, and I see people benefit from it, and so that's why I do this, and I actually thoroughly enjoy it. So today, let me get rid of this banner here so I can clean up the screen a little bit. And how do we do that? Right there. Awesome. Today we're talking about what does it mean to love God, and I'm curious to know what your guys' answer to this question is. What does it mean to love God? Susan says, "Happy Monday. Great to see you, Susan. Always awesome having you in the chat." And yeah, so Susan, let me know, what does it mean to love God? Because it's my belief, especially when you're looking at the scriptures, when you're trying to navigate and get understanding, if you don't love God, and this is the analogy. It's not a perfect analogy, but this is what I thought of this morning. It's kind of like, and this is my personality. If I was to go and watch some random, let's say, 12-year-old boys playing soccer, right? To me, it would be boring. Um, but if my son was out there on the field where there's a love connection, I would be so much more in tune with what was happening on the field. So, in relation to having love for God, I think we miss so much, and it's nearly impossible to navigate the scriptures if we don't first love God, which is the greatest commandment, right? And we'll get into that. So let me know what you think. And in the meantime, uh, I can't remember if I made mention, but I'm also on Rumble. If you're not subscribed to Momentum Canada on Rumble, I encourage you to do that. My Rumble stream is actually being wired through Roku right now, through Awake Canada. That's another separate app on the Roku device. So if you have that device at your home, and my understanding is, I actually don't know what the status is on it, but it's supposedly going to be available on Apple TV and Fire Stick, Amazon Fire Stick. So that's another way. But I guess the disadvantage of watching there is you can't interact in the comments. That's the funnest part. So that's the only the downfall. Susan says, "Have a deep relationship with Jesus. He's awesome." Yeah, yeah, and then it's yeah, it was a very interesting thing to explore this morning. I'm trying to think through these things. Um, and here, let me see if I can share this. And again, everybody on Instagram, you can't see my screen. If you want to see my screen, going over to YouTube and Rumble and Facebook, and you can see me there, and Twitter as well. So I'll be sharing my screen here. Just 1 second. There we go. And there we go. And there we go. You should be able to see this. Yeah, I wanted to start with this. This is Jesus being confronted and tested by one of the Pharisees. The Pharisees, obviously, like Jesus was Jewish. The Pharisees were Jewish, but there was these Jewish leaders that were scholars. It calls them an expert here. So one of them, an expert in the law, tested him, Jesus, with this question. He said, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" And Jesus, and I find this kind of refreshing and a good reminder because, like, if you were to ask just just, the general the people that believe in God just don't take him very too seriously. If you were to ask them what's the greatest commandment, they'd probably say something along the lines of, the golden rule: treat others the way you want to be treated, love your neighbor as yourself, because that's very popular. But what we seem to just kind of steamroll over is no. Jesus replied, he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. So we can't start with love your neighbor. We have to start with loving God first, because I think when we love God, it'll come naturally to love to love our second naturally, right? Our second nature once we're born again is to love your neighbor as yourself. If you love God, you will love your neighbor. Does that make sense? That's what I'm trying to get across here. Give me a second, ladies and gentlemen. I want to just make sure my Facebook feed is on the up and up. Looks like it is. So we'll keep going. We will keep going here. All right. Bring that back up. Yeah, so I was watching it. Well, every week I watch so much, different stuff, different content, different preachers, different presenters, different points of view. Sometimes it gets a little murky. And this past week, I was talking to a gentleman, which I'm not sure what his faith was or is, but we were talking about slavery in the Bible. We got really deep into it because I had made a short video. I've been making these like comedic short type, um, trying to evoke conversation type of videos. I've been uploading them to TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and YouTube. And I did one on slavery. And so we got into a really deep discussion on some of the more challenging texts, specifically some that, you know, point to it appears that God condones slavery of other nations to come in. Like we agreed that no, God doesn't agree with slavery within the Israelites. But there's a verse that's trickier to navigate that suggests that outside slaves can come in. So we were tackling that that topic, and it got to a point because this guy was genuine. I don't doubt his sincerity of wanting to have answers like this, but I think for me, um, it's kind of like having a I don't want to use that analogy. But put it this way: if you love God, if you fear God, I don't think we have the right to question Him. And that sounds authoritarian in a sense, but here's a good example. Let's say my wife was late coming home. Is my relationship with her healthy if I automatically think the worst? Like, if I automatically jump to the conclusion, "Oh, she must be, cheating on me because she's 5 minutes late for dinner. She's supposed to be here 5 minutes ago." That would be outrageous. There'd be something drastically wrong with our relationship if that was the conclusion I jumped to. So, I think what was lacking here, and I could be wrong, but the person I'm talking to, I just doubt if there's love in his heart for God, because for me, I'm okay. I'm on a need to know basis. I don't have to be. Um, I don't put it this way. I don't expect God to have to justify everything He does, especially in ancient context where it takes a long time and careful study to really find out what they were talking about. I think there are answers, but for me, that's just I do it out of curiosity and so that I can learn more. You know, learn more ways of being intimate with God. It's not I my posture isn't as a skeptic, but as a lover of God. That's what I'm trying to get a point or get across. All right, and I was watching this Bible teacher online. His name is Mike Winger. He's a great teacher. He's uh he's very smart. Not everything I agree with, but he had this video up yesterday where he was reacting to a video of Christopher Hitchens. If you don't know who Christopher Hitchens is, he was a very popular atheist, and he's since been deceased. But there was a video of him bringing up the point and kind of a challenge to the Christian is he asked the question, what is something moral that Christians can do that atheists can't? And I mean, that's right, their argument, right? Saying because they think Christians are saying that atheists don't know how to be moral. That's to me, that's not what I say. That's not what I mean. I think atheists can be moral. They just can't justify morality. They can't account for it. They don't ground it in anything. They're borrowing from Christianity to in order to ground their morality. But what Mike Winger brought up with which I thought was just a interesting and good point is that the one thing that Christians can do that atheists can't is this first and greatest commandment. Love God with all thy heart, thy soul, and thy mind, right? That's what atheists can't do. And that's the starting point. So if they're missing that, no wonder they're atheists. So that's my question. How can, like, if I know you guys are, through the camera and we can't see each other's face. You can see my face. I can't see your face. But if you were an atheist coming to me, or if you were just someone seeking, how could I explain to you, like, what would I say if you asked me, how can I love God? Like, what does that mean? Like, where's the start? What's the starting point for that? And so that's what I want to get into. And I wrote down some points that we can maybe expand on. If you guys have anything to add, just let me know in the comments. If you agree, if you disagree, or if you have something to add to it, by all means, let me know. So this is the first point. I wrote down, when we stop loving and admiring ourselves, it's easier for us to love God, right? If we stop elevating ourselves and thinking, we're the good person, we're the goody two shoes that's going to get us to heaven or earn brownie points in life or get us ahead in life. As soon as we stop that and humble ourselves, I think it becomes easier to love God. And I mean, a practical example is like before I was married and before I had kids, life was about me. Life was about, what Brandon wanted to do, whatever it was, anything that I enjoyed doing as a young single man, came to a halt. Realistically, it came to a halt when I got married and had kids because it became less about me and about them. And which I find joy in. I'm not complaining about that. I find absolute joy in that. And I think it's similar. I think it's similar when we yield our own desires and interests to have this relationship with God. And I think that's the starting point. That's the stepping stone to, take off running in your relationship with God and walk with God, right? And okay, so the second point I brought up is when you realize you don't want to go through trials. Okay, so the question I actually wrote down was how do we begin to love, whether it's God or someone else? And so my answer was when you realize you don't want to go through trials without them. So like when I was dating my wife, when I knew she was the one I wanted to marry, I didn't want to do life with anybody else. I just knew this was the person. Like I was positive, right? When you realize you don't want to go through trials without them. I remember thinking that as a young kid, because things would happen. some tragedies to people that I loved, and I would just see their lives be torn apart because they didn't know where to turn, and they would reject God, and it was just like I found comfort in God. It was I couldn't wrap my head around that, and that kind of made me cling closer to God because I wouldn't wanna go through any type of devastation without God. Susan says, "Mustard seed, start small and water it. Water it with getting to know who he is." Jesus asked his disciples, "Whom do they say I am?" It's like dating. You need to get to know someone first to love. Yeah, that's a good point. A relationship, right? That's what a relationship means. It's a process of growing to know the person, growing to trust the person, growing to appreciate the person. Um, But I also will in the case of God, I think it's similar, but I think there's also cases where it can be instant. You can instantly gain an appreciation, gain a love for God. Like, wow, like your eyes can be open and be like, "Oh, wow, like this is God? Love this guy." Right? But you're right. I think as you keep going in that relationship, it just gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And that's where you can just open up the Bible and just read it with God having all the good intent like, that's how I see the scriptures from Genesis to Revelation. I see God and his good intentions all throughout it. So if there's something that I don't understand, it's my problem. It's a me problem, and I gotta figure it out. So and that I guess that kinda for an atheist watching, they'd be like, "Yeah, that's ignorant. That's ignorant." But it's not at the same time because we're talking about, um, that starting point of first growing to love and trust God. And yeah. So next point. Let me read this over first. See, right? Yeah. So seeing what God's already done in the past, so in history or in your own life, right? So that's part of that relationship thing. What's God's track record? And so that's helpful for me. I mean, I've seen ancient times 3,000 years ago where he's loving and caring for people, bringing them out, rescuing them out of slavery, giving them victory after victory, saving them from their sin ultimately, and making all these promises and prophecies that eventually came true through Christ, and there's still some to come. So that's the exciting part, the things that are still to come. But just personally, in my own life, there's been so many situations where I mean, even just having sometimes just that little voice in your head that gave you the wisdom to make a decision, and you look back and you go, "Oh, wow, that was God." Like thank God I had that voice in my head to tell me that. And that's happened time and time again. I mean, so many examples. Seeker being is in the house. Great to see you. Heart, I think okay, so my wife told me this. That emoji, I always thought it was prayer. But apparently it's a high five. So are you giving me a high five? Right on, right on. I never knew that. So I was always sending my friends, "Praying for you. I'm high fiving for you." That's funny. Um, yeah, and I mean, that's the power in your own testimony, right? Your own story. Nobody can take that from you. So when somebody says, "There's no proof," are you kidding me? My own testimony. Like, I came from a love or a sin-loving sinner to God-loving a God-loving sinner. Someone who desperately thirsted for sin is now desperately thirsting for the things of God. That's a miracle, right? So, we have our own testimonies. Hello, seeker being. Yeah, 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 yeah. Awesome. You guys are having a chat. Right on. So that's that one. Seeing what God has done in history and in our own life, right? That's something that can help us begin to start loving God. The next one is recognizing how much we are in danger without his sacrifice. That's one of those eye openers, right? So when we truly understand it, I don't think we truly understand the need for Christ until we understand who we are in our sin, right? And I talk a lot about this. I try to mention this every stream, how the law of God, the 10 commandments and the perfect life that Jesus lived, it's designed, God gave that to us to humble us. He set the standard so high. Jesus met that standard, that level of perfection. He lived a sinless life, but none of us have done that, can do that, or will ever do that. And when we recognize that, when we recognize we're bankrupt, we're bankrupt, there's nothing we can do, that humility is what helps us, recognize that without a savior, we're in trouble. And so it's a different aspect of love. Like I'm not saying you'll love God because of that, but you will at the same time, because it's like you're in a fire and you see a fireman coming, coming through the window. I guess that is a form of love. It's just like you're so thankful, like, oh yeah, right. Um, Someone's saving me. And once they do save you, it's just like you're so thankful, you're appreciative, and you're honoring. And cool analogy I heard a little while ago is a father and son walking along the shore, and the father says to the son, "Don't get too close to the shore because there's alligators in there." And the son keeps testing his father's limits, and he keeps saying, "Hey, no, like get away from the shore, like get your feet out of the water." And so he tries to lead them away from the water, but the son keeps running back to the water and kind of, shin deep in the water and giggling and laughing. And uh, after a while of doing this, crocodiles grab him. A croc grabs him, grabs the boy, pulls him into the water, and the dad dives in, saves him, throws the kid out on the shore, but the alligator takes the father and chews him to pieces. Kind of brutal story, brutal analogy. But the question would be, do we think it's realistic that the kid would then continue in that act of what caused his father to do that? Or would he appreciate the sacrifice? Would there be a level of reverence there? To me, that would be an unshakable. If my dad did that after I was just goofing off, oh my goodness, right? I suppose like people that have been in war, right? They're friends that take their lives for one another, like people that jump on top of grenades and allow it to explode on them so their buddies don't get killed, like that stuff. I think if my buddy did that for me, I would live a little bit differently. I would live like yeah, like literally someone else's life was taken so that I could be living. So I'd be making sure I'm not wasting a moment or taking a moment for granted. So there's that. Yeah, recognizing how much we are in danger without his sacrifice. Let me go on over to Facebook, make sure there's no messages coming through. I think we're good. Sometimes I just miss comments, so I apologize if it's a little distracting. All right. So the last one. This is an interesting one, and I didn't think it all the way through, so I'm curious to know what you guys think. Last one is believing that God loves us with all his heart, his soul, and his mind. Right? Because if we don't believe that, if we don't believe God even cares about us, because I think that a lot of people feel that God's distant, that he's this guy way out in the galaxies that we can't even put a telescope on. If that's our view of God and how we think he thinks of us, like no wonder we're so distant in our relationship with him. But if we truly believe that God is just so like head over heels in love with us and wanting us to make it across that finish line of eternity, right? I think that's a healthy attribute to your relationship with him, and so I encourage that. So those are those are my points. I'm sure there's so many more, but I think those are that's a good start. It's a good start at least. All right. Seeker Being says, all part of his wonderful, perfect plan. Yeah. Yeah. So. How can you ever doubt it? Yep. He sent his only son to save us. Yeah, that's part of it. Exactly. 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 You got it. So, yeah, when we truly love God, we don't need answers to questions because we trust him. And like I said before, the analogy of my wife, just to immediately think something negative, like she's out with another man or something, like the love and trust that I have, between my wife and I, it just tells me I don't need to worry. That's the value of trust and of love. I don't need an explanation from her. I don't. Now, it doesn't mean this doesn't mean we shouldn't seek answers, because I said this before, and I can't remember how I worded it, but there's a big difference when we question God from a posture of skepticism, right? If we're seeking answers just to prove God wrong, that's not the right posture. Our posture should be, we just want to know more about you, God. We just that's how science began. All these people, they began with the love of God, and the study of science brought them closer to God and gave them further reasons to praise and worship God. So it's very, very similar. And I think a great example, Susan says, God is not far from us. That's right. It's we that are far from him until, yeah. Okay, until you find him. Seek and you will find. That's right. Exactly. Crypta Maria, or Maria, I'm restreaming you on Twitter. You are awesome. Oh, thank you so much. Appreciate that. Thank you. That's awesome. Lynn B says, I feel the same level of trust for my hubby. There you go. I wish everyone could find and have that type of a relationship. Well, yeah, that's a good point, right? Because if that's the type, if you can't trust your spouse like that, there's problems. You probably should see a counselor or get some help from a friend or something. 'Cause, I mean, that's a good indication, right? A good indication. But one person I wanted to touch on in the Bible is Job, right? Job is like this ultimate example of, and I'll bring this up because there's specific wording that God uses to describe him, which, I mean, if God said that about me, I'd be like, yeah. So let me find this here. Okay, because so Satan's basically wagering with God, saying, let's tear, or let's just read it. It's pretty long, so I'll skip ahead here. One day the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them. The Lord said to Satan, where have you come from? Satan answered the Lord, from roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it. That just sounds creepy to me. Like he's just prowling around, this creepy devil. Then the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? And this is the part. There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil. So Job, before this all went down, which was just terrible, that all these things that happened to him, before all this went down, he had a love and fear for God. He had a reverence for God, and he shunned evil. He had a relationship with God. And then I think a lot of us know the story where, well, let's keep reading here. Does Job fear God for nothing? Satan replied, have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? So he's basically saying, well, you're protecting him. Of course he's going to, and you've blessed the things he's done and given him tons of flocks and herds are spread throughout the land. But now he's daring God. I dare you to stretch your hand and strike everything he has, and he'll surely curse you to your face. Right? So Satan's not a dummy. I think a lot of people underestimate Satan. He's a knowledgeable guy, put it that way. So he knows, well, he knows that when humans take their blessing, have their blessings taken from them, or when bad things happen to them, right? Very popular argument. He knows that when you do that, people start to point the finger at God. People start to say, where are you, God? And why aren't you doing anything about this? So I guess what we can take from this is that in the same way God trusted Job with this little situation, he can trust each and every one of us. When we love God, that's what I mean, guys, that's how I feel every time I've gone through just terrible things in my life. I feel humbled because well, first of all, I have that relationship with God. I trust him. I love him. But to know that he trusts me to trust him, if that makes sense, right? He knows that I understand that his intentions are pure, that his intentions are good. There's no I'm never thinking once that, "Oh, God's changed his ways. He's become an evil tyrant." I don't think that. I never think that. Like I said, even with the things I don't understand in scripture, much like that, when there's things in my life I don't understand, regardless of how bad it is, like, and I'm sure every single one of you have a thought that comes to mind when I say that, when there's something in your life where you're just like, it's like the bottom of the barrel. And your flesh wants to cry out, "Where are you, God?" Right? But when you love God, when you have a relationship with God, and when you trust him, you don't need answers. You just trust and you get through it. In fact, and this is what's been helpful for me, is when I'm going through the storm, like with my heart situation the other day, I was terrified. Or not the other day, but the other week. I was terrified. I shared with you guys, I thought I was gonna die. But as it's happening, I'm saying, "Thank you, God, because I know you're gonna get me through this." As I'm s Now, God could have taken me then, but I was thanking him not for my desires. I was thanking him for his will being done because I know no matter what, his will is being done. Doesn't matter what's happening because my part of my understanding of, who God is and what's happening is that we're also in a fallen creation, which is not God's fault. We chose that. We chose that. So let me back up here for a second. Everybody's saying hello. Devin is in the house. Devin Cutmore, great to see you, sir. Good afternoon. I switched over from Rebel News because I'd rather hear about God. God bless you all. Yeah, that's the thing, guys. And I'm happy something like this can be that avenue, right? Because I'm always in the news as well. When you have your head in the news, it gets so frustrating. There needs to be we need this type of stuff. So I'm happy you're here, Devin. Happy you're here. Yeah, yeah. Great to catch this live. Hello. Brandon, did you get your heart drops yet? I did, and I've been taking them, and they're yucky. No, the way I described it to my wife, it tastes like I'm eating Hobby Lobby. It's like cinnamon and glue. But ever since I've been on it for like 5 days now, my blood pressure has been perfect. Pulse has been perfect. No problems. I mean, I've been back in rhythm for a couple weeks now. So I don't really have a way to measure. Actually, I do because they did an echo on my heart. So I guess I could just be like, "Hey, look at that echo," and then a couple months from now, do another one and see what it did. You must have gotten the original. Maybe try the cinnamon. Yeah, yeah, the cinnamon is what did I say? I thought I said cinnamon. Yeah, that's the one I got. It's like cinnamon. I don't know what the other tastes like. It's cinnamon and something else. It's just very strong. It's like, oh, I flush it down with the water. But yeah, and the great thing about Job and this would, I mean, Job gets his entire life torn apart from him, right? Satan just doesn't have any mercy, and he takes away his livestock, his children, kills all his children, his harvests, like everything that he had. The only deal was God said, "Don't touch Job, like don't hurt Job, but you can take away everything else." So despite going through all that, he refuses to blame God, right? And it's his friends, his so-called friends coming around telling him to go and chirp God and go what's his I can't remember the guy's name. I don't know. Everybody in the Old Testament sounds like they were named during a sneeze. It's like, I can't remember his name, but he came to Job saying, "Job, you're a righteous man. Like you don't deserve these things." He's like, "You should be questioning God." And his wife too, right? Job's wife was like, "You should curse God and die." What? What a supportive wife. But the interesting thing about that is we as readers, we get to see what was going on right as it started, right? We see this conversation between Satan and God, but Job has no idea what's going on, right? He has no answers. He has no answers. And then we see God show up at the end, right? When Job finally breaks and says, "God, why are you doing this to me?" And then God shows up eventually and says, like, "Who are you to question my ways? Like, were you here when I laid the foundations of the earth?" And he goes, there's actually the book of Job has been labeled, I believe, as like one of the most uh, or one of the best pieces of philosophy in the entire history of the world. Like, it's a very, very beautiful and powerful book. Um, but it's just that it's a great picture. It's a great picture of what is so common today. I mean, just millions of people have benefited from the story of Job. So no wonder God allowed him to go through this because God knew people needed this. God knew people needed to know to hold on and trust him. Hold on and, don't require answers. Just trust what I'm doing, right? I don't need your input right now. So that's kind of how I navigate that. And we touched on this a number of streams ago, and it's just so relevant. But Romans 8:28. Susan says the book of Job helped me. I read it over and over for a month till I understood it. Mm, it's a great book. It's a great book, and I think the hard thing to understand, and for me at least to swallow sometimes, is that it's very famous verse Romans 8:28. Can you guys see this? Yeah, you can see that. That all things work together for good. I think sometimes I wanna believe that it's just some things work together for good for those that love God. There's that key phrase right there, love God. So it's not saying for everybody, it's for those who love God and all things, not just some things. All includes the devastating things. Because here's God. He's taking a messed up, crooked, and demolished world that's in self-destruct mode. Like I said, it's our own doing, but he's using it. He's using every piece of it without infringing on our free will, because he still wants us to freely choose him. That's the essence of free will. So he takes all these things that we don't understand. Like the one thing I was talking to this fellow about in terms of slavery, yeah, because I made reference to before how there's a situation in the Bible. There's kind of two tiers of discussion that goes on in the world today, and a lot of people just misunderstand what servitude meant in the Bible. It was just a way to help fellow Israelites who were in debt to work for other people, just like an employee or someone who was drafted into the NFL. Like there were contracts. If you didn't have money, it kept you out of poverty. But then there's verses that suggest that God says to look outside of Israel and bring slaves in, right? And my answer to that, which is, it's very simple for me to understand, because I see God as this, he's trying to use his people, the Israelites. He rescued them from Egypt. They were being brutally treated and abused. There was no aspect of human rights or human decency at all. Rescues them from that, brings them into their own land. And he constantly says things along the lines of, take care of the poor, or take care of the vulnerable, or if there's foreigners that come into land, take care of them, show them kindness, because he always, and this is the key thing he constantly says. He said, remember where you came from, right? You came from Egypt. You know what it was like to be mistreated. So don't treat other people like that. That's constantly what he was saying. Constantly, over and over again. I was counting like almost 30 times in different verses he was saying that. He kept saying, since you were once slaves, like do the opposite. And so this verse it's a bit difficult to get people to understand. But again, if you have that love for God and you know his intentions, you see what's happening here. For me, I see God recognizing that, yes, slavery was a thing that was out in the broader world. It was a brutal thing. It was a slave trade that was happening everywhere. So God was setting the example with his people, saying, don't make slaves of one another, treat them with respect, dignity, and kindness. And, but we're leaving the door open for other nations to come and experience what Israel culture is like, because we're setting the example. Let's bring them in. Yes, take their slaves, bring them in, because that situation that they were in is way worse than what we can offer them, which it constantly says, be kind to the foreigner. It assigns all kinds of rights to foreigners. So that's how I see it. I see that God is constantly, he's got his ducks in a row, put it that way. He's not out to tell us that slavery is good. He's not telling us that that's something he condones. It's not. But again, I think in light of that, let's say, for example, God said to one of the Israelites, go and get a slave, bring them here. What if that slave had an integral part in paving the way for Christ to come, right? That slave eventually marrying someone else who had a baby, who did this, right? It's all a part of an intricate plan. So I think in light of that, we can see why God does that, because I gave that explanation to him and he wasn't satisfied with that. He said, I just wish God would say no slavery. But I said, well, if he said no slavery at all, those people wouldn't have been exposed to God's people. They wouldn't have been rescued from that brutal slavery on the outside. I said, why would God close the door to that? That's not the God I know. God is, and this is consistent, right? God's always had the door open for Gentiles, right? He had his people that he loved, his chosen people, but he's always had the door open for Gentiles. We see that with the book of Ruth that we covered. Was that last week? Right? She was a Gentile. Um, there's a few in the line of David, like Obed. Um, yeah, I can't remember any others on the top of my head, but yeah. Let's go back to the stream, see what you guys are saying. If you're enjoying the content and would like to support the channel, YouTube takes 30% and Rumble takes. Thank you, Len. Appreciate that. Bob Beck. You need to be an organic farmer to know God. I don't know what that means. I don't know. Maybe I'm too young or too stupid to understand that one. If God condoned slavery, he would have never sent his only son, Jesus Christ, who came to set the captives free. Yeah. Right? So that's so important to start with the love of God. Love God with all your heart, soul, and mind. Makes sense to me. I just want to make sure. I think I covered all my notes. I just jot down things during the day. Okay. No, let me just touch on this. Lord's Prayer. It's the Lord's Prayer. And I think there's so much to pick out of this, right? I'll read it through here. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread and forgive us our debts as we have also forgiven our debtors, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. So the thing I always like to point out is this is a perfect prayer, and it was a perfect prayer back then and still is today, and this is why it's so famous. I believe because it's a perfect combination of praise and worship. Because look at the first half is pointing to God, our Father in heaven. Hallowed be your name, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Then the second half is right, seeking God for ourselves. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our debts. And also, we also have forgiven our debtors, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. So it's this perfect combo of praise and worship. But I think what stands out for me today in this is, well, first of all, hallowed be your name. That's like holy is your name. Like stand in awe of who God is. Like, and that's part of that love and trust and receiving who God is for who he says he is. But then the next part is interesting. Your kingdom come. Your kingdom come. I don't know about you guys, but maybe it's just because at the age I'm at right now, it's very depressing looking around in our country and realizing that I may never afford a house one day. Like right now, we rent. To be honest, my wife and I are very modest spenders, I'll say. Like we can afford things, but that doesn't we're not ones to chase after the latest trends or the latest things that people buy. And I think that's a big pressure for a lot of people my age is that they have to have the house, they have to have the family, they have to have the car, they have to have by a certain point in their life. Usually it's around, I guess not too long ago, it was around, between 20 and 25. That was the age that everybody seemed to be getting their life in order, getting that full-time career and, with the pension and benefits and just being set up for life. But the reality is that is very rare today, very rare. People still living with their parents, people still renting, people still saving and saving and saving, and if things aren't getting better. But for me, and this has never really bothered my wife and I, um, because well, just personally, I've always understood that if, God wanted me to have a house, he'd provide a way for that. He'd open the right doors and would come along. But I think part of that is understanding that this isn't about our kingdom. It's not about setting up our little kingdom here, not about having the car and the house and, you know, the white picket fence. That's not what God wants us to do. And I talked about this at the very beginning of the stream. That was one of the points is, that moment when we start when we stop lifting ourselves up on a pedestal, when we stop admiring ourselves in our own life, lay that down, put it to the side, and recognize that this is about his kingdom to come. Your perspective it'll shift. And again, the interesting thing about that, because a lot of people would probably naturally think, well, if you take away your desires, you're going to be miserable, right? No, I actually get joy out of knowing that I'm furthering the kingdom of God, right? By focusing on kingdom work rather than building my kingdom here. And then that last line, your will be done, not my will, but yours. Kind of saying the same thing, right? Your will. That's a hard thing to say. Hard thing to believe, hard thing to apply. Your will be done. Yeah. Let me check out what you guys are saying. Okay. All right. So Lynn's explaining the joke to me. To be an organic farmer means to work with the earth and with God rather than with scientists and chemicals. Okay. So let me go back to what he said. Maybe it just went over my head. You need to be an organic farmer to know God. I like it. It makes sense now. Thanks, guys. Appreciate that. Brandon, when did you know you needed God? Just wondering. Good question. When did you know you needed God? Well, I'll be completely honest. When I was 6 years old, my grandma passed away, and I started hearing the language coming from my parents that she's with Jesus, and she's in eternity with Christ and with God. As a young kid, up till that point, I was always extremely bored with prayer because my dad would come up. I have 7 brothers, by the way, and I was bunked in one room with 2 of my other brothers, shared bunk beds, and my dad would come up and we would say the same prayer every night. And I remember what it was. It was just, dear God, thank you for my mom, my dad, and my 7 brothers. In Jesus' name, amen. That's all it was. And I was so bored of it. It didn't mean nothing to me. But I knew what prayer was. We closed our eyes. We were talking to something up there. But when my grandma died and I started thinking about death for the first time, I was just like, that thought kind of sobered me up at a super young age. It was just like, well, golly, I need to know how to do this myself, how to get there myself. And at that point, I remember that I was, like I said, 6 years old, and I began just listening intently and praying by myself. My dad would leave because I was still bored of those prayers because they were just repetitive. So when he'd leave, I'd be sitting in my bunk, just talking to God. And so it was very, very early for me, very, very early. And yeah, as for recognizing I needed him, I knew that I needed to understand. I had this quest as a young kid to find out what the truth was and to find out how I can get to know this God better and better. Lynn says, Brandon, if you'd be interested in moving to Calgary, we'll soon be selling our rental house. We could work out a decent price for you." Oh. Oh, man, I would, but my entire family's here. I would miss them so bad. Yeah, 7 brothers. Well, there's 2 of them that are in Toronto, and they come pretty often. They moved because that's where their work took them, but, yeah, I don't know, I'm kind of a mama's boy. But that if I ever wanna run away, if I wanna run away from home, Lynn, I will take you up. My entire family is also in Ontario. I'm way out here. Really? Really? Susan, you're lucky you started out young. It took me a while. Well, I think the foundation that was there for when I was young because and my parents were an obvious influence. So I was around it my entire life, that whole conversation, the whole talk, right? But I still went through my teens. I don't think I ever went through doubts because I went to high school and, some of the replacement answers of people explaining, science, how science disproved God, I would read it and be like, "That's not a good answer." Like, that answer takes more faith than what I believe. Like, don't say that I'm religious and you're not. We're both religious. I just say, "In the beginning, God." You say, "In the beginning, dirt." That's the only difference. So, and I was kind of snarky that way in high school, not openly, but in my head, I was always like in my head just saying, "That's not a good argument." Like, God's a better argument for that. I was never satisfied with people's explanations of trying to explain away God. And my mom bought me a biblical archaeology book when I was 12 years old, and, I was just so fascinated with that stuff. Like, most kids would be watching Ninja Turtles, Power Rangers, that type of stuff. I was watching documentaries on the book of Exodus, of how people were finding chariot wheels under the Red Sea, right where it was where there's literally a land bridge, a coral land bridge taking you from one side of the peninsula, um, in Egypt to the other side, to the desert. And then finding, like, carvings of, you know, basically reading the book of Exodus and finding exactly what's written there. That type of stuff just, like, in my head as a kid, it'd be like, "How are people denying this? Like, they're finding this out in the desert, and the Bible is telling them where they can find it. How in the world, uh, does anybody have the gall to deny this?" But, yeah, it's just stuff like that piqued my interest, and, um, yeah, as the years went on, my college years, when you get online and you even just sharing a Bible verse, you'll get an atheist saying, "Wow, the Bible's actually blah, blah, blah." And then you kinda get in defensive mode, and I got really good at in my earlier years, I was pretty blunt, we'll say, and maybe not very thoughtful of how I would reply to people. I cared more about being right than, the person I was actually talking to, so there was stages like that I went through, and I had to learn that if I really wanted to love on people and show them how to love God, that I had to be loving myself. So, yeah, it's been a long, long journey, and, that's what I give, social media credit to, because sometimes I hate social media, but, it's certainly exposed me to opportunities to talk to a lot of people of different beliefs and backgrounds and perspectives, and I can probably think of a lot of things where I used to believe one thing, but after my, opinion being molded over years, I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot. So, I think that is all I wanted to talk about today, guys. That was, yeah, for me, that's a big one because even yeah, I'd be kind of repeating myself if I got into that. Just, talking about if you don't have the love of God, if you don't have a love for God, scriptures won't make sense. So I hope you guys enjoyed the stream. And Yeah. I've been posting some shorter videos. Now, all the young kids, and this is the interesting thing, all the young kids seem to be over on TikTok. Now, I vowed to myself that I would never get TikTok because the Chinese own it and they're tracking you or whatever. Then I realized Facebook is no different. Now, it's not necessarily China, but um, put it this way, all my enemies know where I live, and so I wasn't too worried about it. But I'm finding on TikTok, there's a lot of people looking for answers. A lot of young people, and so that's who I want to reach out to. So I've been over on TikTok making these short videos that are kind of fun, humorous, but they have some truths to it. And my hope is just to inspire. Like I had the conversation with the guy that I mentioned at the beginning of the stream about slavery. My little slavery video evoked conversation. He didn't agree with it, and so we dove into a good, really good conversation. So, it's still ongoing. Um, so that's my intention there. If you guys want to check those out, those are I'll be uploading them to YouTube as well. I just started a Instagram page for Momentum Canada, so that I'll be posting the videos there, and again on TikTok. And I want to start a Facebook page for Momentum Canada as well. So other than that, thank you guys. Let me read the last of this. I'm really enjoying your new trajectory. It gives me hope after hearing nothing but negativity all week long through news and politics. Yes. Yes, I love hearing that. I like your short videos where you're talking with an with an alternate you. Yeah, I'm good at talking to myself. It's a skill that I've acquired over a long career. The shorts are great. Well, I appreciate it. All right. Well, and thank you, Lynn. Oh, wrong side. Thank you, Lynn, for this shirt. It is beautiful. It's very comfy and so much information packed into a beautiful little symbol. It says Momentum Canada live discussions every Monday at noon Eastern Standard Time on YouTube and Rumble. You packed the entire message on there. I'm pretty impressed, and I love it. Very comfy, like I said. And yeah. Anyways, guys, thank you so much. Have a great week. Please be in prayer. We need God. We need Him in our lives to get us through. Don't try it. Don't try it without Him. All right. Take care. Bye for now. Live lifestyle discussions. There we go. Take care, everyone. Bye bye.